Before Clara Whitmore could step down from the wagon, the woman on the porch pointed toward the bunk shed. "Put her trunk under the eaves," she called to the driver. "The bunk shed is behind the smokehouse. This house has no use for a bride." The driver would not look at Clara. Behind the kitchen glass, Mrs. Torrey lowered her eyes. That small surrender hurt almost as much as the woman's words. Snow was already covering the only road back. The ranch house stood weatherdark beyond the gate while wind drove white sheets across the yard. Clara had crossed 3 states to get there. One gloved hand locked around the strap of her green carpet bag, and the other wrapped over the small purse that held the return fare she had promised herself she would not touch unless she had to. Clara blinked against the cold. "My trunk," she said. "I am Mrs. Maddox's bride." The woman's mouth tightened at the name. "My daughter was Mrs. Maddox. You are a woman from an advertisement who arrived too late to be useful in the way that was first intended." Clara climbed from the wagon anyway. Snow bit through the hem of her skirt at once. "My name is Clara Whitmore," she said. "I answered Eli Maddox's letters in good faith. I rode here under his promise of marriage." "And you arrived to a changed house." The woman did not come down from the steps. "Mr. Maddox is on the south line with the foreman. The child is sick. Winter has already set its foot on this place. If you want wages, we can discuss wages, but this house has no use for a bride." That was the first moment in 2 weeks of travel when Clara felt the full danger of the journey. A strange woman in Wyoming winter could be killed just as neatly by being made unnecessary. "I did not come for wages," Clara said. "Then you came on a foolish hope." The driver climbed down and set Clara's trunk in the snow beside the porch. He moved fast, as if he wished to leave before the wind or the shame settled too deeply on him. Clara's face burned though the air cut like ice. "If Mr. Maddox changed his mind," she said, "he might have told me before I sold my room, left my position, and spent my last decent dress on the train." The woman in black folded her hands. "Men do not always command events, Miss Whitmore." "No," Clara said, "but they can command courtesy." The kitchen woman flinched at that. The woman on the porch did not. "If you need shelter for a night," she said, "the bunk shed has a cot. If you prove useful tomorrow, we can speak of the kitchen. If you are waiting for a wedding, you'll freeze before it arrives." The wind shoved snow hard enough across the yard to sting Clara's cheek. Her throat tightened, not with tears but with the hard knowledge that one more proud sentence might send her back down the road with nowhere to go before dark. Hoofbeats broke across the moment. 2 riders came through the blowing snow from the south pasture gate. One was younger, red-faced, and broad across the shoulders. The other rode a taller bay in a dark sheepskin coat dusted white at the sleeves. He took in the scene all at once. Clara by the wagon, her trunk in the snow, the woman in black on the steps, the cook pretending not to hear. "What is this?" he asked. The older woman turned toward him. "Your mistake has arrived, Eli." He looked at Clara then fully. She saw weariness first, then a steadiness she had not expected and was immediately afraid to trust. "Your name?" he asked. "Clara Whitmore." Something moved in his expression, not delight, not romance, only recognition followed by shame. "I wrote for you," he said. His mother-in-law answered before Clara could. "You wrote in October, before Helen's mother had to come manage a sick child in a storm house, before the roads closed, before sense returned." He did not raise his voice. "Mrs. Pike," he said, "I asked Clara a question when I was not speaking to you." The yard went still for a different reason. Clara lifted her chin. "Yes, you wrote for me. I came as fast as trains, stage roads, and snow would allow." He glanced at the trunk in the drift again, and when he looked back at her, the shame in his eyes had turned outward. "You should not have been left at the gate." Mrs. Pike's mouth thinned. She should not have been invited after November. I had no chance to send a wire before the road closed. He swung down from the saddle. And I will not turn a woman back into a storm because my house prefers easier arrangements. The words were plain. Clara saw the cost in Mrs. Pike's rigid shoulders. Eli Maddox walked to the trunk, lifted one side himself, and looked at Clara as though the next step ought to belong to her. "Will you come inside?" he asked. "For tonight," she said carefully. "For tonight," he agreed. She took the other handle of the trunk because she would rather freeze than be carried into any room like baggage. He did not argue. Together they carried it up the steps and into the front hall. The house smelled of pine smoke, wet wool, and something medicinal. A pair of small boots stood by the stove. A narrow hallway led to a closed door with a black ribbon still hanging from its latch. Clara guessed at once whose room no one had entered since the funeral. Mrs. Pike shut the porch door against the wind and said, "Rose has a fever. The doctor cannot ride until the pass clears. Whatever you imagine this journey would be, you may set half of it aside before supper." Clara turned. "I imagined honesty," she said. "You may still have it," Eli answered before his mother-in-law could. "My daughter is 8. My wife died 11 months ago. I wrote for a woman because a ranch can survive bad weather longer than a child can survive a house made only of grief and hired hands. I will not pretend that sounds romantic. It wasn't. It should have insulted her. Instead, it sounded more honest than anything she had heard since St. Louis. "And now?" she asked. He set the trunk down near the stove. "Now there is a storm on us, my daughter is ill, and you have crossed a continent to stand in my hall. If you stay through this weather, you stay with the right to leave when the road opens. Your return fare remains yours. If you choose to go then, I hitch the team myself. If you choose to remain long enough to see whether we can make truth into something better than a bargain, that choice will also be yours." Mrs. Pike gave a soft sound of disapproval. Clara was looking at the narrow purse still clutched in her hand, then at the man who had noticed it, and decided to speak to that fear first. "Where would I sleep?" she asked. "In the small room off the main hall, not the shed." He did not glance toward Mrs. Pike when he said it. "The bunkhouse wall takes wind through the north boards. I won't put you there in this. And if I prefer the shed, then I'll know I deserved it." Something in Clara eased, though not enough to call safety. "I will take the hall room," she said. The cook exhaled. Mrs. Pike only turned toward the stairs. "Then keep your voice low when you pass the landing. Rose has just fallen asleep." Clara followed Eli down the short hall after he carried her trunk inside. The room was plain but clean. One iron bed, a washstand, a narrow shelf, 2 wool blankets folded square, and a latch that worked from the inside. That was enough. For more clean Wild West romance like this, subscribe and ride with us. When Eli set the trunk down, he stepped back immediately. "Mrs. Torrey will bring hot water in a moment," he said. "Supper's when you are ready. If you want the eastbound the first day the road clears, say so, and there will be no quarrel from me. And if I want an explanation from you before supper." He looked as though he deserved that. "You can have it now. I meant every word in the letters. I did not stop meaning them, but I stopped believing I had the right to ask a woman into a house still arranged around mourning." "Then why didn't you tell me not to come?" "Because by the time I understood how poor a host I might make, the pass had already closed behind the mail coach. And because every time I put pen to paper, I hoped the thaw in me would come before you did." "It didn't," she said. "No. And your child still wakes calling for her mother if the fever climbs. That settled it more than any bargain could have." "Then let me wash," she said. "And afterward, if your daughter needs another pair of hands more than your pride does, you may call for me." His gaze stayed on her face a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Thank you," he said. He left. A little later Mrs. Torrey brought up water and an armful of folded towels without meeting Clara's eye for long. "I didn't speak at the gate," she muttered. "That was poor of me." "Yes," Clara said, "because politeness would have made the apology too cheap." Mrs. Torrey looked almost startled, then gave a short, rueful nod. "Fair enough. The girl's room is second door on the left if Mr. Maddox asks for you." He asked for her before the hot water had cooled. Rose Maddox lay in a narrow bed beneath a patchwork quilt, cheeks bright with fever and one dark braid half unraveled against the pillow. She looked too thin for 8 and too solemn even in sleep. The room itself was neat in the careful, overmanaged way of spaces kept by adults who feared disorder because so much else had already broken. Eli stood beside the bed with a basin and a cloth, but there was a stiffness in his hand that suggested he had done this too many nights without ever ceasing to feel helpless. "She drank some broth," he said quietly, then coughed most of it back. Clara touched the girl's forehead with the back of her fingers. "She's burning." "I know. And the doctor. 2 days if the road holds, longer if it doesn't." Rose stirred under the cloth and whispered something that took Clara a second to understand. "Mama." Eli's face changed and shuddered at the same time. He leaned in, but Clara was already moving. "Rose," she said softly, kneeling so the child would see a face at her level. "I am Clara. Your father is right here." The little girl's lashes fluttered open. Her eyes were gray like the sky outside, but they fixed on Clara with bewildered seriousness. "You're not my mother." "No. Grandma said a woman was coming." "A woman did come." Rose studied her for 2 long breaths. "Are you staying?" Clara could feel Eli listening harder than the child was. "For tonight," she said. The answer seemed to satisfy Rose more than a promise might have. She let Clara lift her enough to change the pillowcase and tuck the quilt closer around her shoulders. Eli fetched fresh water when asked. When Clara sent him for willow bark from the kitchen shelf and honey from the pantry, he went without offense, which told her more about him than a dozen smooth compliments could have. By the time Rose had swallowed 3 careful spoonfuls of tea and drifted back toward sleep, the room had warmed. Clara rose from the bedside and found Eli still watching her. "You have done this before," he said. "Boarding houses teach many arts. Nursing is one of the less thanked." "You should have been thanked." "Perhaps," she said, "but tonight your daughter needs the tea more than I need old apologies." That almost lifted the corners of his mouth. "Mrs. Torrey has made supper," he said, "if you'll eat." "I will," after another cloth on Rose's head. He nodded and stepped aside to let her do it. Outside, the storm had thickened until the windows showed only a pale, moving blur. Inside, Mrs. Torrey laid out salt pork, beans, coarse bread, and boiled apples while Mrs. Pike sat stiff-backed near the stove. "You know how to nurse," Mrs. Pike observed. "Yes." "And to cook." "Yes." "And to sew." "Yes." "Useful talents." Clara met her eyes. "Useful women are still women." Mrs. Pike's jaw set. Eli drew out a chair for Clara without comment. She noticed it because no one had done so for her in years, and because he did not place her at the far end of the table like a servant. He seated himself between Clara and the stove, with Rose's empty bowl still in front of the child's place upstairs. Supper was plain and quiet, and Clara listened anyway. "The south line was drifting shut before noon," Eli said at last. Mrs. Pike answered, "You should sell the lower pasture in spring and be rid of the debt that keeps winter biting through every wall. That pasture keeps the herd alive in August. A man with 1 daughter and no wife doesn't need a herd fit for 10. Clara kept her eyes on her plate, but she felt the blow land. Eli did too, He set down his fork. "That is enough." "Is it?" Mrs. Pike looked toward Clara without looking directly at her. "You wrote for help because the house had no woman in it. Help has arrived. Must the whole arrangement now be wrapped in fantasy to please everyone's pride? A winter fix does not become a wife because a man pulls out a chair." Clara looked up. "My pride was wounded at the gate," she said. "It is not so delicate that supper can finish it." Mrs. Torrey made a small sound behind her cup. Eli did not smile, but the room shifted an inch toward him. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the lamps turned low, Clara sat on the edge of her bed and opened the carpet bag. The return fare purse lay where she had left it under her gloves and mending roll. She took it out, weighed it once, and set it in the washstand drawer. Not hidden, not surrendered either. Outside, the storm battered the house until sometime after midnight, when the wind dropped and a new sound carried down the hallway. Coughing, harsh tearing, and too fast. Clara was out of bed before she had fully woken. She reached Rose's room to find Eli already there, one hand braced against the mattress, the other trying to raise his daughter high enough to help her breathe. "The fever broke an hour ago," he said, not taking his eyes from Rose. "Then it climbed worse." Clara touched the girl's face, hot again. "Tea," she said. "Fresh water, a clean cloth, and another blanket for your shoulders because if you shake like that, you'll frighten her more." He obeyed so fast that she almost forgot to be surprised. Between them they sat Rose upright, coaxed tea down in small sips, cooled her face, and waited out the worst stretch of the coughing. It was close to dawn by the time the child sagged back onto the pillow, sweaty and limp but breathing easier. Clara remained on the chair beside the bed while Eli stood at the window, staring out into the thinning gray where the world was slowly reappearing. "You haven't slept," he said without turning. "Neither have you." "That has been my habit." "And has it served you well?" He looked back then. The lamp shadowed the hollows beneath his eyes. "No." "Sit down," she said. "I am sitting." "No, you are standing like a man waiting to be sentenced." That actually brought a brief, worn smile to his face. He took the chair opposite hers. For a time they watched Rose breathe. "Helen never let the room grow cold," he said finally. "After she died, I shut her room because I could not bear the smell going out of the quilt. My daughter learned to sleep in this one because I could not bear to step across another threshold." He rubbed a thumb once over the cup handle in his hand. "That is not a noble confession, only a true one." Clara looked at the ribbon, still tied to the upstairs door latch across the hall. "Grief is rarely noble in a house," she said. "It mostly makes a mess no one wants to clean in daylight." "And what does loneliness make?" She almost laughed, but there was no humor in the answer. "Bad bargains, small humiliations, women who begin to think usefulness might be the nearest thing they will ever get to being wanted." He held her gaze. "That is not what I wrote for." "No," she kept her voice low because Rose slept between them. "Then what did you write for Eli Maddox?" He did not answer at once. She was glad of it. Men who answered too fast on such matters were usually selling something. "For a house that did not sound empty to my daughter," he said at last. "For a woman I might speak honestly to, even if I had no ornament to offer her. For the chance that decency might grow into more, if more ever had the nerve to come." The room went still around that. Clara looked down at Rose's small hand curled atop the quilt. "And if more never came?" "Then I meant to give you honesty and a road out, not a cage." That was the moment she first believed he might actually understand the difference. Rose stirred, opened her eyes, and found Clara still in the chair. "You stayed," the child whispered. "Until morning," Clara said. Rose nodded as if that promise alone was enough to get her through another hour, then slipped back to sleep. The dawn that followed brought clearer skies and worse news. Clara found Rose's small traveling trunk under the bed while she was searching for fresh stockings. It was not only packed, it had a paper label tied to the handle with Mrs. Pike's handwriting on it. Miss Rose Maddox, care of Mrs. Edwin Pike, Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory. Clara carried it downstairs with the label turned outward. Mrs. Pike was at the table cutting bread. Mrs. Torrey stood at the stove. Neither woman spoke at first. "What is this?" Clara asked. Mrs. Pike glanced once at the trunk and returned to the bread. "Prudence." "No, Prudence is putting more wood by the back door before the next storm. This is theft with ribbons on it." "Rose cannot remain in a ranch house where every winter takes another piece out of her father," Mrs. Pike said. "My sister in Cheyenne has a schoolroom, a doctor, and proper company. By spring, when the road's clear, the child will go." "Does Eli know?" "He knows what is best for her, though he has been too soft-hearted to say it aloud." "And Rose?" "Children do not choose their own guardians." Clara set the trunk down so hard the stove lids rattled. "No," she said, "but decent adults can refrain from choosing over them while they sleep." Eli entered at that exact moment, bringing cold air and the foreman with him. Denton Shaw was a narrow-faced man with a fur collar too fine for honest winter work and the easy confidence of someone who had spent months mistaking access for right. Snow clung to his boots. He looked from the trunk to Clara to Mrs. Pike and seemed to enjoy the shape of what he found. "Trouble already?" he asked. "Only if men have made it," Clara said. His brows lifted. Eli's gaze dropped to the trunk, then hardened. "Augusto." Mrs. Pike rose from the table, bread knife still in hand. "I will not apologize for planning ahead where you refuse to. The child needs schooling, not another winter of cough and grave ribbons. As for Miss Whitmore, you can keep her in wages if that suits your pride." Clara saw the line go tight in Eli's jaw. "Put the trunk back upstairs," he said to Clara. "Rose isn't going anywhere in spring without my say." She did not move at once, not because she doubted him, because she needed to hear whether he had noticed the other part. "And me?" she asked. He looked at her fully. "You are not in wages unless you choose them." Denton gave a soft chuckle. "That may grow costly before long." The room sharpened. "Why?" Eli asked. Lower feed came up short again. "If the next storm blocks the road, we'll be cutting into the lambing stores by week's end. My brother's freight line can carry extra sacks from town, but he'll want the south pasture secured against the debt note before he sends them up blind." Clara knew almost nothing about cattle arithmetic, but she knew the look of a man who had found the angle by which to press an injured place. "The south pasture isn't yours to bargain," Eli said. "Not yet," Denton shrugged out of his gloves, "but winter likes plain choices. Men with sick children and lonely houses ought to be grateful when a simple one presents itself. Tell Maddox sunrise is the last decent hour. After that, my brother's line hauls for men who know when to sign." Mrs. Pike said nothing to defend Eli. That, more than Denton's smirk, told Clara how long this pressure had been gathering. The rest of the day moved under a strain the storm had not fully lifted. Clara mended shirts at the kitchen table and helped Mrs. Torrey put up broth while Rose dozed by the stove and Eli rode the lower line with Denton. Rose went to bed early. Mrs. Torrey retired with a muttered complaint about her joints. Mrs. Pike remained in the parlor with the lamp turned low, writing what looked like a letter. Clara passed the doorway on her way to fetch more wood, and heard her own name before she meant to listen. "She is steady enough for winter," Mrs. Pike was saying to some unseen chapel woman seated in shadow. "But that does not make her permanent. Eli wrote in weakness. Men do foolish things in mourning. Once the road's open, she can leave with her fare and whatever gratitude she imagines this place owes her. Clara stopped in the dark hall. "And Rose?" the chapel woman asked softly. "Rose will go where women with blood rights and proper standing can raise her." Clara stood very still. She could hear Mrs. Pike turning a page. "The stranger may have been useful in a storm," the older woman went on, "but no sensible household mistakes a winter fix for a wife." Clara carried the wood to the kitchen anyway. Later, she opened the washstand drawer in her room and looked down at the return fare purse she had left there, thinking of Rose asleep upstairs and of the look on Eli's face when Denton pressed the pasture. She was still standing over the drawer when a soft knock sounded on the door. "May I?" Eli asked through the wood. "If you must." He entered only after she answered, and he did not come far. That restraint might have steadied her if she had not been so angry. "I should have spoken sooner," he said. "About what?" "About Augusta, about Denton, about the fact that this house has made you pay for a journey you already paid dearly enough for." Clara folded her arms. "Did you hear her?" "Enough." "And—" He looked toward the open drawer where the fare purse rested like an accusation. "And I have been a coward where plainness was required." "That is honest," she said. "It is not comforting." "I know." "If I remain here only because Rose needs me and Winter cornered your better intentions," Clara said, "tell me now." He took one step closer, then stopped as if even that might be too much. "If you remain here against your own will," he said, "then I am no better than the men you should despise. If you remain because this house begins to feel worth testing, then I will be grateful. And if, when thaw comes, you decide gratitude is not love and leave anyway, I will not call it betrayal." "You think I might leave?" "I think you would be wise to keep the road available until I prove I deserve anything else." That is a dangerous way for a man to speak if he hopes to hold a woman. "Then perhaps I ought to hope for something better than holding." He left before either of them said more. The next night Rose's fever returned. By then the second storm had arrived. Wind pushed against the house in long, angry shoves. Snow hissed against the windows. Denton had sent word at dusk that the lower drifts were already shoulder-high in the cut, and that if Eli wanted town supplies before morning, he had better sign the South Pasture paper while there was still someone willing to haul for him. Eli crumpled the note and fed it to the stove. "That won't stop the storm," Mrs. Pike said. "No," he answered, "but it stops me from reading his greed twice." Rose coughed deep into the evening. Clara sat at her bedside with willow bark tea and a damp cloth while Eli brought hot bricks for the foot of the bed. Near midnight, when the coughing finally eased, Clara nodded toward the kitchen. "Tea," she whispered, "for both of us before either of us falls over and gives your daughter a new trouble." He followed her quietly downstairs. The kitchen was dark but for the blue stove light and one lamp turned low. Clara poured from the kettle. Eli took the cup she handed him as if he were still half afraid to accept comfort directly. "You haven't gone near that room upstairs," Clara said, surprising herself. "Which one?" "Your wife's." He did not pretend confusion. "No." "Ever?" "Not since the undertaker left." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "That is a long winter for one closed door." "It has been a long winter for most things here." "Mrs. Pike thinks I am temporary," she said. "Augusta thinks grief gives her the right to nail every other living soul into place." "And what do you think?" He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "I think I began this badly and have not yet earned the right to speak of permanence. I think my daughter asks where you are before she asks for medicine. I think the house sounds different when you move through it." His jaw tightened once, not with reluctance but with care. "And I think if I say more before the storm has finished testing us, It will sound too much like a lonely man grabbing at warmth. And if the storm finishes testing us, she said, then I would rather say plain things than lose them to caution. Rose called weakly from upstairs. Clara stood at once. Then keep your caution until morning, she said. Your daughter needs the next plain thing first. Morning came gray and wrong. The team that should have stood ready at the shed was gone. So were the 2 extra sacks of lambing feed Eli had stacked by the side door, and the small quinine case Mrs. Torrey had set aside against Rose's next fever turn. Boone, the younger hand who had ridden in with Eli on Clara's first day, came through the drift behind the barn swearing under his breath. Denton hitched out before daylight, he said he was taking the town road while it still had a spine to it. I thought he meant to fetch the extra sacks. Then I saw Maddox brands on the sled under his tarp. Rose, wrapped in a blanket on the settle, lifted her head weakly. He took the black case too, she whispered. The one Mrs. Torrey said was for me. I saw him from the stair rail. His coat sleeve brushed the rail. He looked back when I coughed, then kept walking. Eli went still in the center of the kitchen. Mrs. Pike pressed a hand to her breast. Then all the more reason to send for the doctor and sign whatever must be signed. Clara turned so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. Sign what? No one answered. Boone looked at the stove. Mrs. Torrey shut her lips tight. The south pasture, Eli said. Denton's brother wants hauling rights and summer grazing as security against winter feed. Clara stared at him. And he stole your child's medicine to make the weather speak for his contract. Yes. The word landed like an axe. Mrs. Pike rose. Then stop pretending pride can feed a ranch. Put your name where it must go and save the child. Eli crossed to the washstand drawer in the kitchen where Clara had placed her fair purse the night before when she came down to warm stones. He lifted it and set it on the table between them. The road may break clear by noon if the wind keeps dropping, he said. Take Boone's gelding and go with the settlement sleigh as far as Elk Run. I won't hold you here while this turns uglier. Clara looked at the purse, then at him. You would send me away now. I would give you the safer road. And Rose. His face changed, and she saw precisely how much the question cost him. I will manage Rose. With medicine Denton took, with a contract you have not signed, with a mother-in-law who thinks I am a winter fix and a foreman who just proved he values your child less than a pasture. Eli said nothing. Clara pushed the purse back across the table toward him. No. Clara. No, her voice sharpened into steel. If I leave today, I do exactly what they have all counted on from the first step at the gate. I become the stranger who was useful until weather changed. She reached for her coat. Where is the lined shack? Boone looked up first. Eli did a second later. 3 miles west of the cut, Boone said slowly, but the drift'll be deeper there than here. And the doctor could be holed at the chapel house by now, could be anywhere the road decided to break. Clara tied her bonnet strings under her chin. Then the line shack is nearer. Eli moved between her and the door. You are not riding into that storm alone. Good, she said. Then you can saddle while I wrap the child for one less hour of shaking. He caught her arm, but not hard. The safe thing is to go east. The safe thing for whom? His hand loosened. For you. She pulled free and looked him straight in the face. I know, and that is why I won't. Rose is sick. Denton thinks he can frighten you into selling tomorrow by making today impossible. If I leave now, I help him do it. That answer reached something in him that caution no longer covered. Then I ride with you, he said. Mrs. Pike made a sound almost like outrage. Clara barely heard it. She went upstairs, wrapped Rose tighter, kissed the child's damp hair before she had time to think whether she had the right, and left her under Mrs. Torrey's watch with strict instructions about the stove and the willow tea. When Clara came back down, Eli was waiting by the door with the bay already saddled, and a smaller roan hitched to a narrow sled frame. "You can ride or sit the sled," he said. "I can ride." "I know." That tiny admission warmed her more than the coat. They crossed the yard into a storm that had gone from noisy to cruel. The world beyond the barn disappeared in white bands. Clara bent low over the roan's neck and trusted the animal more than her own eyes. Eli rode ahead, turning in the saddle often enough to make sure she remained in view. Once at the worst drift crossing, he reached back, caught her bridle, and pulled both horses through a cut where snow had piled to the chest. The line shack stood half buried against a stand of black timber. Inside they found a small stove, a rough bunk, one lantern, the medicine case Denton had thought too small to matter, and a ewe in labor in the lean-to. "Of course," Clara said. Eli almost laughed despite the storm. "I warned you, ranches don't stage one trouble at a time." They worked fast. Eli found the quinine. The black case still had kitchen flour on one corner, the same pale dust Mrs. Torrey had left on the shelf that morning. Clara wrapped it in burlap under her coat, then knelt in straw and cold to help the ewe while Eli held the lantern. The lamb was shivering and all knees. Clara tucked it inside the sled blanket without pausing long enough to decide whether she had gone mad. "If I die bringing your livestock home," she said, "you may tell heaven I object to the division of labor on this ranch." This time Eli did laugh, short and rough and startled out of him. "If you die, I expect heaven will have my company soon enough, because I don't mean to explain your loss to myself or my daughter." She did not answer them there, because they deserved daylight and breath enough to survive the hearing. The ride home was worse than the ride out. Snow had filled half their tracks. Once the sled tipped and nearly dumped the lamb and medicine into the drift. Another time Clara's mare lost footing and dropped to one knee so hard Clara saw white sparks behind her eyes. Eli hauled the rein, steadied horse and rider both, and then kept one hand locked on the roan's bridle for the rest of the last mile. By the time the ranch roof came back into view, Denton Shaw stood in the yard beside the sled he had stolen. Clara saw the branded feed sacks under his tarp before she even reached the hitch rail. Boone saw them too. So did the two freight buyers from Elk Run who had come up the road behind Denton hoping to learn whether the Maddox winter contract would be signed that day. Rose was in the window. The child could barely stand, but her gray eyes widened when she saw Clara climb down from the saddle with the burlap-wrapped medicine pressed to her chest. "You came back," Rose whispered through the cracked window seam. Clara did not answer then. She strode past Denton and through the front door, laid the quinine in Mrs. Torrey's hands, and made her pour the first dose before she turned around again. Only then did she walk back into the yard. Denton had his best expression on by then, a mix of concern and insulted duty. "Reckless thing to do," he said loudly enough for Boone and the buyers to hear, risking a sick room because a woman wanted to prove herself. Clara stopped 3 feet from him. Snow ran down from the brim of her bonnet. The orphaned lamb bleated once from the sled blanket behind her like a witness too small to understand the scale of the quarrel. "No," she said. "Reckless was stealing a child's medicine and winter feed before a storm to force a man into signing away his pasture." The yard went silent. Denton's face hardened. "Mind your words. You took the black quinine case from the shelf by the kitchen and hid it with the branded sacks under your tarp. That case wasn't on my sled." Clara opened her coat and drew it out. "No, it was in the line shack where you thought no one would bother looking before dark." Boone stepped forward then, jaw tight. "I saw the Maddox brands under that tarp before first light," he said. You told me it was town freight." One of the buyers, Hoke Drury, moved to the sled and pulled the edge of the canvas back himself. 2 feed sacks rolled into view with the M burned black across the canvas. A third followed. Beneath them lay the length of harness from Eli's missing team. "Looks like ranch freight to me," Hoke said. Denton's voice rose. "I was moving it to higher ground. Any fool here knows the lower shed leaks in hard weather." "Then why take the medicine?" Clara asked. He turned on her. "Because this whole house has forgotten what winter costs. A widower with a fevered child and a woman he fetched from the railhead doesn't get to play Lord when the road decides otherwise." Eli had come to the doorway by then. Snow was still in his hair. His face looked carved from the same hard weather around them, but his eyes were alive now in a way Clara had not seen before. "Say a plane," he told Denton. Denton gave a hard little laugh. "Fine. I took the team and the feed because you were never going to sign until the house felt enough fear. There. Plain enough. The south pasture secures the line brings the feed, the child keeps breathing, and the bride stops filling your head with impossible pride." No one breathed after that. Clara felt the whole yard shift under the weight of his own confession. "You heard him," she said quietly. "He stole Rose's medicine and your winter feed to force your hand." Hoke Drury spat into the snow. "I don't haul for men who pinch medicine off sick children." The second buyer, a younger man named Tate Morgan, took one step back from Denton as if the distance itself were a verdict. Boone moved to Eli's side. "Neither do I work for one." Denton saw the break happen and lunged for the last thing he thought he still had. "You fire me now and you lose the herd note by spring. You lose the line. You lose half the men. You're one woman, one child, and one storm from begging the same contract back." It might have worked if Clara had not already ridden through the storm and returned. Eli came down the steps slowly, each word laid like iron. "No, I am one man late in seeing who stood in my house and who stood against it." He took the contract paper from inside his coat, the one Denton had been pushing for 3 days, and tore it in 2, then in 4, then in 8. The pieces blew white and black against the drift. "You're done here." Denton took a half step as if to reach for him. Boone and Hoke both moved before he could. "Try it," Boone said. He did not. Mrs. Pike appeared in the doorway behind Clara, one hand gripping the jam. "Eli," she began, "the child still needs proper arrangement. Even if this brute is gone, the girl cannot be raised between cattle accounts and chance women." Rose answered from the stairs before her father could. "Clara isn't chance." The child had dragged herself down wrapped in a blanket, pale and shaking but standing. Clara turned so fast her lungs hurt. "Rose, you should be in bed." "Maybe later." The little girl's gaze never left her grandmother. "You keep packing my trunk when I'm asleep. I don't want East. I want my father. I want Mrs. Torrey's biscuits. I want the red pony in spring. And I want Clara if she'll stay." Mrs. Pike's face crumpled and hardened at once. "A child cannot know what is best." "No," Eli said, "but she can know where she is wanted, and so can I." He crossed to Rose, lifted her before her legs failed, and carried her back toward the stairs. Halfway there he stopped and looked over his shoulder at the room he was leaving behind. "Augusta," he said, "you may stay through Christmas Eve because I will not put an older woman on the road in this weather. After that, Boone takes you to Elk Run, and your sister can decide what house you mean to command next." She made a sound of outrage, grief, and disbelief all tangled together. "You would choose a stranger over Helen's mother." He shifted Rose higher against his shoulder. "No, I am choosing the living over the grip the dead have left you with." That line seemed to strike everyone in the room at once. Denton left first because he had no footing left to stand on. Hoke and Tate took the feed sacks from his sled and stacked them by the kitchen door. Boone untacked the stolen harness and laid it beside Eli's own. Mrs. Torrey, who had been silent at the gate and too careful ever since, turned to Clara. "Bring the medicine," she said. "The child gets another spoon now, and I'll be damned before we let today's work go to waste." Clara obeyed because obedience was easier than feeling everything at once. By evening the house had changed shape. Rose's fever eased under the new doses. Boone bedded the returned feed under canvas in the dry shed. Hoke promised fresh sacks from town after Christmas without a pasture held over Eli's head. Denton's bedroll vanished from the bunkhouse before dark. Mrs. Pike packed her own valise in a silence so stiff it felt like one last performance of authority no one believed anymore. Clara found Eli in the parlor near the shut room with the black ribbon. He was standing exactly where she had seen him pause 3 times before and always turn away. "Rose is sleeping," she said. "Good. Mrs. Torrey is making enough stew for 12, as revenge on the storm. Also good." He still did not move. Clara looked at the ribbon on the door. "You can leave it shut another year if you need to." "No." He reached up, hesitated once, then untied the black ribbon and let it fall into his hand. "I think I left too many things shut in this house because opening them felt like a betrayal of what was gone. Today taught me that leaving them shut can betray what is still here." She watched him lay the ribbon on the side table. "That sounds expensive," she said softly. "It is." "Clara," he said at last, "if your fare were still enough to carry you east at thaw, and if Rose were well, and if no debt or storm remained to confuse the matter, what would you want then?" She thought of boarding house hallways, of women who were always valued more for how quietly they fit themselves into corners, of the gate in the snow, of Rose's thin hand reaching from the quilt, of Eli standing in the yard and tearing up the contract before witnesses could talk him out of courage. "I would want a table where no one set my chair because they had to," she said. "A room where plain speech did not make me disposable, work that was honest and paid if it needed paying, and a man who asked what I wanted before telling me where I belonged." His gaze never left her face. "I can offer the asking," he said. "The rest I would rather spend my life proving than promise cheaply tonight." Her throat tightened for an entirely different reason than it had at the gate. "That is nearly courtship, Mr. Maddox." "Then perhaps I'm finally approaching sense." She smiled despite herself. Christmas Eve brought a clean cold so sharp the whole basin seemed carved new. Mrs. Pike left at noon under Boone's watch, and with enough food packed by Mrs. Torrey to shame the bitterness out of any reasonable woman. Whether it succeeded, no one tried to guess. Before climbing into the wagon, Augusta turned once to Clara. "You think a few storms and one grateful child have made you permanent." Clara held her ground on the porch. "No, I think they proved I am not temporary in the way you meant." Augusta's eyes filled then, but no one stepped in to soften the cost for her. After the wagon rolled away, the house seemed to exhale. Rose spent most of Christmas Day wrapped in blankets by the stove, bright-eyed enough to insist on helping Mrs. Torrey shell peas for supper. The red mitten sat on the table while Eli repaired a broken shelf in the pantry. By late afternoon snowlight had gone blue outside the windows. Inside, the table stood set with the good crockery that Mrs. Torrey claimed had been waiting too long in the sideboard for ordinary use. Clara came in from carrying wood to find Rose already sitting in her chair, one small tongue caught between her teeth as she concentrated on the place settings. Eli stood at the far end of the table with 3 bowls in his hands. Clara reached automatically to take one, but Rose spoke first. "No, I want to do this." The girl slid carefully from her chair, carried one bowl to Eli's place, another to her own, and then stopped with the third in both hands. She set the bowl on the chair beside hers. then took the red mitten from the sideboard and laid it next to the spoon as solemnly as any priest setting a blessing on a table. "This one is Clara's," she said. The room went utterly still. Mrs. Torrey turned away very fast under pretense of the stove. Eli looked at his daughter, then at Clara, and something in his face became simple at last. Clara could have left in that moment if she had wanted. The fair purse still rested in the hall drawer, and no one stood in front of the door. Eli came around the table slowly, and stopped beside the chair Rose had claimed for her. "I owe you a plain question," he said. "Not because winter forced us into one house, not because my daughter loves you, not because you saved what I should have protected sooner, because I want to ask it honestly while you are still fully free to refuse me." Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her fingertips. "Then ask it." He drew a breath. "When the thaw comes, don't leave because you think this house sees you only as need. Stay because I would like the right to court you properly, Clara Whitmore. Stay because I want to learn what sort of husband I might become when the asking is honest and the answer is yours. Stay because I have come to want you here for reasons no storm made and no bargain can excuse." Rose's eyes were huge with hope. Mrs. Torrey had gone completely motionless by the stove. Clara looked down once at the bowl on the table, at the small red mitten beside it, and then toward the hallway where the fair purse still waited in its drawer, untouched. She crossed to the drawer and took the purse out. Everyone watched her. She came back to the table, set the purse beside her bowl, and laid her hand over it. "This remains mine," she said. "It should," Eli answered at once. "If I stay with the road still real." "Yes." "If I tell you no in spring, you hitch the team yourself." "Yes." She let him wait one breath longer, not out of cruelty, but because she needed to feel the full size of the freedom before she used it. "Then I will stay through spring," she said, "and if your courtship proves half as decent as your worst winter, I may stay longer than that." Rose made such a triumphant little sound that Mrs. Torrey finally laughed out loud. Eli's whole face changed into gratitude so unguarded that Clara understood how careful he had truly meant to be with her choice. He did not seize her hand. He only offered his own across the table, palm up, waiting. She placed her fingers in it. Warmth moved through his grip, steady and almost disbelieving. "That sounds like hope," he said. "It sounds like a beginning," Clara corrected. "Good." His thumb moved once lightly over her knuckles. "I would rather build a beginning than inherit a certainty." Rose beamed between them. "Then sit down," the child ordered with 8-year-old authority newly restored by quinine and victory. "The stew is cooling." Clara laughed then, the sound startling her with its ease. She sat in the chair Rose had set for her. Eli took his place on the other side. Mrs. Torrey ladled stew into the bowls with the solemnity of a woman pretending not to witness history in her own kitchen. Outside, the basin lay under fresh snow. Inside, the table held bread, stew, a red mitten, an untouched fair purse, and 3 people who had finally chosen to stop speaking around the truth. "Very well," she said. "Tell me what proper courtship looks like on a winter ranch." Rose giggled. Mrs. Torrey snorted into the stew pot. Eli's eyes held Clara's with a warmth that needed no ornament. "Tomorrow," he said, "I mend the porch rail before breakfast. After that, if the wind allows, I walk you to the south meadow and ask the question again where no storm can claim it spoke for either of us." Clara squeezed his hand once before letting go. "That will do for a start." Her green carpetbag was not under the eaves now. Her trunk was not in the snow. Her fair purse lay beside her bowl, still hers, while Rose's red mitten marked the chair no one had the power to take from her. Clara lifted her spoon and stayed, not because the road was gone, but because this time the door had been opened by choice.